All right, we are going to have one more story before we close out for intermission. We'll take like 10 minutes of intermission, but we're going to close out with Johnathan Terry, ladies and gentlemen. Wow. You have a fan. You have fans, Johnathan. When I asked him that question, what is he going to miss least about Yale, Johnathan said, the first thing that comes to mind, is that I don't miss class participation grades. That should change. Scoring people based upon the quality of their comments, which according to the green room people is really just if the professor liked you, you got a good participation grade, and if the professor didn't like you, you got a bad one. That is some crazy shit, so I agree with him. I am glad that, it's one reason why I'm glad I didn't go to Yale. How about an enormous round of applause for Johnathan Terry.
I've lived in two worlds since deciding to go to high school in Massachusetts, about 800 miles away from where I grew up on the south side of Chicago. The decision to go to a boarding school wasn't an easy one to make, and so each morning of 8th grade, as my dad was driving me to school, we'd have to discuss whether or not it was a good idea. And I'm sure everyone knows what it's like to be a captive audience with an unhappy parent on a car ride. Dad would ask why I felt the need to go away so young, and I would say, the people seem really nice, and it seems like a great opportunity. But what I didn't say was that, I was tired of being stuck between him and Mom as they were fighting through their divorce. That even though we lived in a historic neighborhood, I felt suffocated because I couldn't walk around the block that I grew up on by myself. That the prowling cop cars and the yellow-vested volunteers making sure that people got to school safely each day didn't make me feel safe, made me worry that something was going to happen. I didn't say that I was afraid if I didn't leave then, I didn't know when I would get out. And so with some argumentative help from my mom, who thought I had a good point or two, and some hard work and even more good luck, I ended up at Groton School. 385 acres of green space and vitality and solitude. And I loved it there. It was unlike any place I had ever seen. And it was cool to be smart and interested there. Almost without any distractions, I could study history and play in the orchestra. I could play lacrosse. But I also experienced some culture shock there. Imagine me at 14 arriving on campus where everyone's wearing salmon shorts and pastel polos, and I'm swagged out in a gold chain and a sweater vest with a bunch of fedoras in my bag. I also remember sprinting back into the dorm once, roughhousing with a couple of boys, and I and another boy were the last two in. And as such, we were barricaded out of the dorms, which is only fair, because rules of the jungle. And as we were banging on the doors to be let back in, the other boy cries out, "Hey, no fair, you guys locked me out with the black kid." And learning how to deal with the indignities, large and small, of being the odd one out, of being the minority, was an important part of my time at Groton. But so was learning how to deal with immense privilege. I learned how to talk, how to present myself, how to study, how to code switch. And those were important lessons for me when I got to Yale, which in a lot of ways is like a bigger Groton, but with more Gothic architecture. I already knew how to be in a dining hall, how to talk to professors, how to live in a dorm, even though my freshman year roommate really enjoyed playing his guitar and serenading me in his underwear, and that one was new. But I also realized by the time I got to Yale that my life was going to be completely different from the lives of my family members. By college age, you're old enough to recognize the displays of wealth that are treated as commonplace on Yale's campus. People talk about senators and CEOs as if they're family members. But I was trying to get a job that would allow me to put some money in my pocket, to send some home to my parents when they needed it, to pay for my flights back home, which felt incredibly expensive. And when I got back home, I would end up on the couch of an aunt or an uncle, and they would say, "What's it like there at Yale, and what are you studying?" And I would say, "I'm studying Japanese, and I want to be a history major." And they would ask, "And what are you going to do with that?" And I didn't know. I didn't even know how to continue that conversation. Most of my conversation topics included things like Johann Sebastian Bach's fascinating history of the musical offering. And that didn't quite cut it for them. And I remember one of my aunts sitting me down once, me and a couple of cousins, and saying, it's great that everyone from this generation is going to college, but can we get a Harvard, Princeton, Yale graduate? And now that I was going to be that Yale graduate, I wondered what that meant. What obligations came with that? And so, jumping forward a couple of years, this all came to a head my sophomore year. On November 6th, 2014, my Uncle Will died of cancer. And this was a man who was in some of my earliest memories. He taught me how to be a host, how to invite people into my space, how to make them feel welcome, at ease. And I remember breaking down in my dorm room when I got the call because I had been so busy that previous summer tutoring and going to flute camps in New Mexico that I didn't visit this dying man. On Christmas morning that same year, I remember my mom waking me up at around 6 a.m. She was handing me the phone, and on the other side was my dad, letting me know that my half-brother Quincy had just been shot and killed. And my relationship with Quincy was a little bit different because we weren't very close. He lived in Tennessee and was incarcerated for most of my young life. But I remember the effects that his death had on my family members. I went down to Tennessee with a couple of folks to attend the funeral and felt guilty that I only saw so many of these people at funerals. And I will never forget the sight of his 4 little boys, the oldest of them only 4 years old, struggling to pull themselves up onto their tippy toes to look into their father's casket. And my dad tells me that one of those boys struggles to this day, saying that all he wants to do is kill the man who killed his father. And I thought a lot after that about how the threat of violence didn't seem to hang so immediately over my life anymore, about how I hadn't been to a family reunion in years, that I was missing the births, the deaths, the celebrations of so many of my family members. I thought about how the things that I was studying at Yale seemed so far removed from the lives of my family members, and I wondered how well we really understood one another. And so, jumping ahead 2 years to my senior year, I thought that I wanted to go to law school, and that I also wanted to do something before that to inform that decision. And so I wanted to teach. I wanted to help people who didn't have the same educational opportunities gifted to me. And so I applied for teaching gigs, but ended up getting this dream job at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, working on criminal justice policy and tutoring to help make ends meet in New York. And the job at the DA's office was incredible in a lot of ways. I got to work on trainings for prosecutors. I got to do research to help inform some of the office's initiatives. Informatively, I got to work on a homicide trial just months out of college that would give me a front seat to how the criminal justice system works. And 2 men had opened fire on a Harlem street. They had shot 5 people. They'd killed one of them and injured 4 others. And I was in charge of evidence for this trial, helping organize it and helping present it at the 6-week-long case while I sat beside the 2 prosecutors assigned to the case. And at the end of that, we got a conviction and a sentence of 25 years to life for the 2 assailants. The morning after that conviction, my boss, the head prosecutor, called the mother of the homicide victim and asked, how do you feel now that your son's killers have been brought to justice? And she said, although she slept well for the first time since her son had died, all she could think about were the mothers of those 2 boys who were going to prison for so long. And I got that. I was proud of the work that we had done. Getting a conviction on a homicide case with only circumstantial evidence is no small feat. But I felt wrong when my colleagues were patting us on the back and saying that we had done justice because that resulted in the imprisonment of these 2 men. And I didn't feel right to celebrate that, regardless of how hard we had worked for that result or what they had done to deserve it. And out of that experience came a class. A course that we teach in prisons was my boss's idea called Inside Criminal Justice that brings prosecutors into prisons. It, in some ways, encapsulates a lot of my lived experience. The class, which I teach alongside a Columbia University professor and an assistant district attorney, really is meant to make people think about the impacts of their decision-making. And inside of those classrooms, with bars on the windows, with platitudes painted on the walls, like proper preparation prevents poor performance, we talk about the differences in perspective between those with resources and those without them. We talk about the impacts of the system on people intentionally or unintentionally. We talk about how to work together, as people from different backgrounds to make a better system. And I've learned so much in that classroom. But maybe foremost among those lessons is that if history is any guide, I will probably always be at the intersection of some number of worlds. And I don't have to choose to exist in any one of them. I can exist across them. And there is so much to be gained in the embrace of my roots on the south side of Chicago and my education at Groton and at Yale. And if I'm going to be stuck at the collision point of a bunch of different worlds, it seems to me like the least I can do is try to serve as a bridge between them. Thank you.